Hi and welcome to part 2 of this Blender Beginner series. In this episode we're going to be looking at the default Windows screen, be looking at how to move around in the 3D view, how to select objects and move them around, and also we'll be looking at the basic tools in the Objects panel toolbar. So without further ado, let's get straight into it and get started. And so welcome to Blender's 3D workspace. In this mode we are in objects mode. There are several settings, there are several different modes that we could use, but today we're just going to concentrate on object mode. What we have in this particular setup is an outliner which gives us all the objects and their relationships to each other. We have the data panel where we have options to manipulate the mesh, add materials and textures, particle effects, and the scene itself, background, and how it looks in the final scene, and obviously the render options, which is what is displayed at the moment. We also have a timeline at the bottom which we use for animating and just animating and playing back the current animations. In the main window we have the toolbar, which gives us all the tools that we need for using. We'll have a brief look at some of the tools. We won't go into everything. Of course, a lot of the things on here require an in-depth look to understand fully, and we'll use a separate video for those individually. On the bottom we have an operator panel, and what that does is each time something happens in here, we get options in the operator panel. Not always, but sometimes. In the main window itself we have the default cube, we have a lamp, and we have a camera through which we can render the scene into a usable image. We have this manipulator widget which we use for moving the object that's selected, and also a 3D cursor which we use for rotating around or just for aligning and moving things. We'll explain that as we use it. It's best shown in context. So let's get started properly. We'll start off with this manipulator widget. We have 3 handles, and each handle relates to an axis of orientation. Green is the y-axis, which is forwards and backwards. Red is the x-axis, which is left and right, and blue is the z-axis, which is up and down. If we use our keypad or number shortcuts, if you're using a laptop, if we press 1 it brings us to the front view, and this is a head-on view. If we press 3 we are switched to the right. Press 7 and we are in an overhead view, and if we press the control key it gives us the opposite. So if we hold down control and press 1 we get the back view, 3 we get the left hand view, and 7 we get the bottom view. Currently we're in perspective mode. If I press 5 it switches us to orthographic mode, which is just a different way of viewing things without any perspective applied to the image. We will see that better when there is more objects in the view. We'll look at that a little bit later in this video. To move around in the viewport, we use the middle mouse button mostly. So if I just press 1 to go into front view, press down and hold my middle mouse button, I can rotate around the selected object. If I scroll the mouse wheel, I can zoom into the object. If I scroll it backwards, I can zoom out. If I press shift and hold down the middle mouse button, I can drag my view left and right. Now, currently the cube is selected. If I wanted to select a different object, I will press my right mouse button and the selected object turns a nice yellowy orange colour, and the widget is applied to that particular object. So again, right mouse button, select an object, and you'll notice that there's a dot in the center of the widget, and that's the origin point of the object. If I come down to the bottom bar and press the widget manipulator button, I can turn that off. You can see the orange dot that indicates the center of the object, and we can move that object out by using the transform tools in the object mode. If I can have it in the center of the object, I can have it at the 3D cursor, or I can have it to a certain point in the geometry. Mostly we will leave that where it is. In object mode, it is fixed to its location within the object. So if I turn my widget back on and move the cube up, you can see the origin point stays within the center of the cube. In edit mode, if I move the cube, the origin point would stay where it was, but we will show you that in our next video. You select with the right mouse button, and using the left mouse button in the edit screen allows you to move and place this 3D cursor, and the cursor is useful because we can use it as a rotation point without having to affect the mesh. And if we look at our widget tools here, we can select the tool, select the middle tool to create a rotation widget, and with the 3D cursor selected we can rotate around that. Or if we go back to our rotation settings and go back to active element, you can see it just rotates around its own axis. The next part of the widget is a scale tool, which we can use to change the scale of a certain orientation. If we hold down the center ring, we can scale it globally along all three axes, and that is the same with the move tool. If we click the center ring, we can move it in 3D space, not just fixed to a certain axis. To use the manipulator, you just grab the end with the left mouse button and it fixes it to the axis upon which you select, and you can move it anywhere in the 3D viewport. If I just rotate slightly and grab the X arrow with the left mouse button, we then can move it along the X axis, along the Y axis and along the Z axis, and that allows us to place this object with a little bit of precision. So just to recap, to select, it's the right mouse button. To manipulate the widget, it's the left mouse button. So right to select, left to move, and the middle mouse button for changing your view. Okay, I think that covers the essentials in the viewport. On the side we have the object tools, translate, rotate and scale, which is everything that we've just covered with the widget. Translate is move. Rotate is rotate. Scale is scale. It's unlikely you will ever use these tools from the toolbar, as it's not particularly precise, as you saw. Things can go wrong and you don't have any control really, especially with the rotate key. But there may be times when you do need to just quickly use them from the toolbar. I can't imagine ever having needed them, so you may as well just forget they exist. Origin allows you to move the origin point to you can move it to the cursor, move it back from the cursor to the geometry, or you can, well, let's do this. Origin to 3D cursor. It's taken the origin from the center of the thing to the cursor, and then we can change the actual geometry and bring it to the origin itself, which is quite useful for quickly moving bulky objects to a certain location without having to grab and select and drag things around and try and get them precise. Anyway, moving on. Duplicate objects does exactly what it says on the tin. It makes a copy of the object. Delete object does exactly what it says on the tin. It deletes the selected object. Join makes two objects into one object, so if we have to select that again. Duplicate object, and now we see we have two objects with separate origin points. If we join them, oops, I select one and then select the other, the first object has this red orange line border around it, and the active selected object has this pale yellow orange border around it. And if we click join, the one with the orange border becomes a part of the same object as the active object, and now they're both the active object and are manipulated from the single point. Shading, smooth shading and flat shading. Smooth shading smooths out the edges and makes round objects rounder. Basically, it takes the polygon data and smooths it, or makes it appear smooth anyway. We'll stick to flat shading for now. We'll get more into shading when we get into higher poly meshes. Keyframes for animation allows you to put a point of location or scale on an object and then move it along in the timeline into a different location and another keyframe, and when you play back the animation the object will move along the keyframe. Motion paths shows the actual motion of the object between the keyframes. Repeat is like your history button. Repeat last. What was my last thing? Okay, let's just move something. Move it up. Repeat last, and it'll move it up by the same amount, same increments. The history gives us everything we've done for a certain number of functions, so we can go back and choose something we did earlier and apply it again. So if we choose the rotate, it applies that rotation that we did earlier again to the current scene. The grease pencil is a drawing tool that allows you to put marks on your object. We have another panel on the other side full of vital information about the location and rotation of the object, the scale of the object and its actual size in world space. We're talking about the grease pencil, so we can choose to have a new layer, we can choose the colour of the pencil, change it to white, change it to green, and we can have different pencils. Just click on draw, we have a black one and a pink one, change the black one to blue. We can also choose which point of origin to draw from. We can draw from the view. Draw, and that draws from the view, so it'll always stay as we are looking at it, no matter where we move from. Drawing from the cursor allows us to be focused on the cursor for our particular line. Surface allows you to actually draw upon the mesh itself. So if we draw a circle and rotate around, you can see how the grease pencil clings to the surface of the mesh there. Okay, yeah, we'll leave those. The ruler protractor is exactly what it says. It's a ruler, allows you to measure distances. So we have 4.54 units of distance. A unit is 1 square. So we have just over 4.5 squares distance between the two objects. Not that that might be particularly accurate, because who knows if that's in the centre or not, I don't know. Anyway, next one is the cell fracture, which is a tool for shattering objects. Oops, I have to just press enter to finish using the ruler. Cell fracture is a panel, like I said, for breaking objects apart. If we hit OK quickly, you'll see a Boolean operation going on, and on layer 2 we can see that we have the object duplicated, but in a broken set of parts. And then we have our rigid body tools. That adds certain physics to objects. So if I tell that to be an active object and I play it along the timeline, you can see it's affected by gravity and it just disappears into oblivion. There it goes. Bye. Bye. And you can see in the timeline it's created a cache in your memory for the data for that animation. So once it finishes going through there, it will play it back at, it shows the frames per second of it going through its actions. That's all very good. You can use that for all sorts of breakages and shatterings and explosions and debris and all sorts of fun stuff. Okay, well, that's enough of that. We'll just have another quick final look at the properties panel. View allows you to lock the view to a certain object, so whenever you move the viewport. Let me run that back there, go to layer 1. I've lost my view. There it is. Lock to cursor. Wherever the cursor is, my view will be stuck to that, and I can no longer pan. I can lock the camera to view, so wherever I move in the viewport whilst looking through the camera, I look through the camera by pressing 0 on the keyboard. Now when I look through the camera, I can move my scene around and the camera remains in position. If I don't have my camera locked and I move around, the camera comes out because it's fixed in space, and I just move around the viewport normally. 3D cursor panel, that just gives us the location of the cursor. We can use these to position the cursor accurately. Item is just the name of the selected item. If we wish to change the item name, which you will do routinely, I will insist on it. We'll just call that Cube Bob, and there is Cube Bob. Display allows us to choose what we see in the viewport, so we can turn off the grid floor, turn off the outline, relationship lines that might be there. Gives us shading options, texturing options. We can have matte caps. A matte cap is simply a preview material. That's a pretty blue material. Change the shading mode to GLSL. Choose a different matte cap. That's a pretty bronze material. motion tracking, it allows you to use tracking data in the window. Background images allows you to put a reference image in the background that you can use to model against or just use as a reference. Transform orientations is pretty much what we have over here. So we can reduce this window now by pressing T, and that just disappears. Depending on your settings, it'll either fade out or slide away. If we press T, we can hide the toolbar. Just press T to bring it back, T to hide it, or we can use this little arrow and just pull the toolbar out. We can hover our mouse over the edge of the toolbar to drag it out if we wish to make the buttons a bit larger, or if we wish to make it a little bit smaller to have more room. Blender does its best to squeeze all the information into the smaller buttons, but you're better off just keeping it as default so you can read things. Of course, like I say, you can always hide it with the T key if it's in the way. And that, I think, is pretty much it for object mode. Hopefully it's been understandable, you've been able to follow it on easy enough. In the next lesson we're going to get into some interesting stuff. We're going to have a look at the editing mode and do a little bit of simple modelling just to get used to the tools, because I'm a great believer in learning by actually doing things. These first couple of videos just showing you stuff have been pretty dull, but I hope they've been interesting enough for you to follow along with. And yeah, next time, good stuff, fun modelling stuff. We will actually get on with actually using Blender. Don't forget to subscribe, because we have new videos coming out regularly. You can leave us a comment in the section below, and keep in touch with us on Facebook, Twitter and Google+. Love to hear from you, and we'll see you in the next video.